Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. My name is Sarah. I am the founder of the Power of Our Story Coffee and Conversation. And today we are doing this all day veterans and first responder, what we're calling a storytelling jam session. So I'm so excited to be able to have civilian writers and producers who have just been touched by the suffering of our protectors. They have taken years to write and produce their Labor of Love documentaries to give our veterans and first responders a voice and to really just tell them you are not alone, and also to give hope of getting their lives back. And so the message, there is hope. I have been so personally touched by each one of these documentaries. So I'm going to go ahead and share all of them. So we're going to have Michael Gier. He is the writer and producer of Wounded Heroes documentary. We also have Ryan Mayers and Matthew Mayers, who wrote and produced Walk with Frank documentary. And then we also have Mark Stafford and Brian Morrison, who wrote and produced Bastards Road documentary. And all three of these hit a different angle in the veteran and first responder experience. Again, each of these I was so moved by. So it's an incredible honor to have you all here. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really an honor.
So tell us about you two and your movie, because I'm.
Okay, so our movie. So I'm Ryan, and this is my brother Matt. Hello. And our movie is about Frank Romeo. And Frank is a Vietnam veteran who, on his 70th birthday, he decided the way he wanted to celebrate was walking across New York State to meet homeless veterans, advocate for veterans with PTSD and other survivors of PTSD. And along the way, kind of coming to terms with his own darkness, his own demons, and which he's been working through for the last 50 years. Frank, for 30 years, he has been teaching about PTSD and taking he has artwork that he's painted kind of as part of his therapy, as part of his recovery. And he also takes reproductions from the National Vietnam, it's called the National Veterans Art Museum in Chicago. He takes reproductions from there on the road, and he calls it the art of war. And he speaks to high school students and basically anyone who will listen to him. He's been doing this for about 30 years. And this walk for him was the culmination of all of that.
Frank's whole process in building this whole educational curriculum that he's been pushing all these years, it all came from traveling. When Frank sort of discovered artwork, it was his own first, then he discovered that there's other veterans out there painting, and no programs to support this. So he really got in his van and took his artwork around the country, just finding people that would look and listen and talk. And by doing that, he made connections with people around the country, found other artists looking to share their work, eventually submitted also to the art museum, and their stuff's now, exhibited there. This ended up, he realized that this was helping him heal. And he realized that just that part of traveling, moving forward, seeing himself, he always says, if he sees the world moving past him, he knows he's not stuck in place. He knows he's moving forward, and part of that PTSD for him was that feeling isolated, stuck in place, literally can't move, frozen. He tells a story where he saw his friends at a diner and wanted to go see them and literally could not take that step. So he uses that as a metaphor. And, this led to him eventually going back to Vietnam, doing the same thing, creating an educational curriculum around him, discovering it on his own. So he would Skype in students in Bay Shore while he was journeying through Vietnam, revisiting all the places that he was back when he was serving there. And part of seeing that country, all this whole society had moved on and he was still stuck in place, really helped him, again, just move forward even more. And, he just felt like this reality-based way of teaching about the history of our soldiers, not just the history of the war, but the history of our soldiers, and how it's so similar dating back all the way to the Civil War. It seemed to work. So all that really led up. It's a layered thing, but it really all led up to him doing this walk, pushing the educational programs, why he focused on New York State, and just walking and doing the same thing that he's always been doing, which is just moving forward, seeing the world move past him and connecting with others, trying to share the message.
So the movie follows his journey across the state and also tells the story of his life and how PTSD affected him and his family.
That's great.
How about you, Michael?
So yeah, my film is Wounded Heroes, and I didn't plan on making this film originally. I was going to be producing another film with, actors. We had a screenplay, just a regular theatrical film. And I didn't know much about post-traumatic stress, which was one of the storylines, post-traumatic stress in this film. And so I wanted to interview veterans and military brass and just try to figure out exactly what is post-traumatic stress, what's working, what's not. And I met a guy in San Diego doing one of these interviews named Carl, and he was on, at the time, they had just lowered it from 18 medications down to 16, but still, I'm blown away. I'm like, how is it possible? You're in your late 20s and you're taking 16 medications, some of them 2 or 3 times a day. So he's popping 30, 40 pills every day. And he said it wasn't helping. He said it was just a Band-Aid that pushed back the symptoms, but that it didn't actually solve the problem. So when I walked out of that interview, I thought, man, I got to put this movie on hold and we got to do a documentary and see if we can figure out if there are better options out there for people battling post-traumatic stress so that they don't have Band-Aids anymore, but we find something that actually gets rid of the post-traumatic stress, gives them their lives back. And I didn't know if that existed. But it ended up being a 3-year journey, doing a lot of research the first year, finding great treatment options and programs, and then setting up the interviews, which we did all over the country with different people. And then the last 3rd year, of course, was the editing, which was a very long process, as you all know. Editing is not an easy task. It's a big deal when you try to get a film like that done. But anyway, so we got it released, and I produced it literally as a passion project to give back as a thank you to our veterans and first responders and anybody battling post-traumatic stress. And the film does feature amazing treatments and programs that are changing lives. And we're getting lots of emails and social media posts from people saying it's changed their lives. When we've done in-person screenings, we've got people in tears thanking us for making the film. And so that was our goal, make this thing, release it so that it saves and changes lives, and it has. And that was my journey as far as why. And we released it in March, and it's playing all over the world. So it's pretty fun.
That's amazing. It really is. I saw the film. It's really fantastic. And, the treatments that you're offering or that you're talking about, I've never heard of any of them.
Mm-hmm.
Really amazing to see.
It's also interesting because, it's just in line of what we found with the Walk with Frank was that, there is no tailored treatment. That's one of the problems right now is that they try to tailor a treatment and everyone is dealing with it in such different ways and can be affected in such by treatments in such different ways, and it's hard to know.
And as you talked about, Frank being isolated, and trying to fight that battle alone, and that's one of the things that we found and that we included in the film, that when you're out in battle, you have each other's back. When you need cover, reinforcements, you call in. You get your reinforcements, and you've got each other's back, and you take out the enemy. And in this case, we've got the enemy of post-traumatic stress, but for some reason when they get home, they don't want to talk about it. They want to isolate. And so we're trying to really encourage people that, like when you're overseas and you're in battle, fight the fight together. It's so important, and there are ways to do that, and they understand each other. I'm a civilian while you guys are civilians. We don't understand. We haven't experienced it firsthand. So for them to put themselves in amongst a group that does understand, and they are not fighting it alone any longer, and they have each other's back, and they can check on each other, week after week, month after month, year after year, that is so important for recovery.
I agree. The connection part of it was one of the biggest aspects that we took away from this. I mean, how it helped Frank, how we saw him rebuild his family over the years. We've gotten to know all of them really, really well. They've become family to us too. And it's amazing after what they've been through. And, even just screening the film, they talk about having gone through so much, just watching these things, reliving these things, and seeing these things, these emotions that, that the film brings up. And, like you said, it's like we haven't experienced it, and we sort of feel like, what's the word, undeserving of the trust, that kept coming into doing this with Frank. And, he's the way he is, he's so open and honest. And, I think seeing him inspiring others with that honesty to also be open and honest, I think it rubbed off on us and everyone that was part of the ground crew and everyone involved. And I think for us, you know, on a larger scale, that connection is about, as a civilian, you know, opening yourself up to what, you know, a conversation with a veteran that you might have, where, you know, I think that's the biggest gap that we need to divide is just that, you know, as civilians, not just thank you for your service and sort of ending it there, which is one of the things that a lot of people discussed in the film, and it didn't quite make it in as much as we wanted to, that sort of concept of it. But everyone we talk to talks about that, you know, seeing that, you know, I support my troops on their bumper sticker, and, you know, it ends there. It ends at that bumper sticker. Yeah. So, you know, it's sort of, and where I originally, I think both of us originally found it really hard. And like I said, that undeserved trust was like to listen to these people opening up to us. Mm-hmm. Then we started to feel like this is exactly what needs to happen. You know, people like us need to hear these stories and listen and tell others that it's okay to ask these questions and hear these stories. And I think that's a big step to these people healing, to everybody healing.
And it was so brave of Frank to do that, to open up and be vulnerable, because he's helping so many because of the fact that he is being so open.
And that's one of the reasons he wanted to do the walk initially, was because, you know, I mean, we live in a society where everyone's on their phones, and everybody's, you know, tends to be a little bit isolated. When you're a combat veteran, it even takes it to another level where, you know, a lot of these combat veterans don't want to talk to anybody, especially someone that doesn't really understand. So Frank's concept when he did the walk was, I want to get out there, I want to meet people, I want to talk to people, I want to kind of have conversations and just be open. One of his initial kind of you know, concepts was, I'm going to talk about my PTSD. I'm going to admit that I have a problem, and I'm not going to be ashamed about it. And I think, I mean,
he says it before every speech he gives. He says, Frank Romeo and I have mental illness, is how he puts it. And, you know, he wants people to know that it's, you know, if it's okay to get up there and talk, then someone else is gonna, and it happens all the time. We saw it happen. People get up there and say, I've not ever said this before.
And for us, I mean, we saw people open up, and it wasn't opening up to us per se, it was opening up to Frank. And part of the reason that they opened up is because of his honesty. So it was really kind of,
but we felt it gave us a responsibility. I mean, we just felt responsible, not just to every single person that wanted to open up to us, but mostly to Frank, to really honor his story, because it's truly amazing.
Yeah,
what he's been through and what he's, you know, overcome is amazing, and it makes us look at things different, and, you know, the little amounts of adversity that we face, and, you know,
and to you know, work through it. I mean, it's not like he's healed, and he never talks about being healed. He talks about PTSD as something that you're always going to deal with, and, you know,
and then
everyone's different.
And to go even larger than PTSD, just mental illness in general. I mean, once you start going down that road, you realize, like, we all know someone, we all have someone, we all deal with issues, you know, levels of issues ourselves. And if it's like, if we admit it to ourselves and we embrace it the way that Frank does, you know, it's a step towards us making ourselves better. And I think that's just the best thing.
And where's the other film?
Mark is right here. Yes.
Sorry, guys.
Mark, good to see you.
Oh, there you are.
Your film's amazing too, Mark. I'd love to hear, you know, about you know, Bastards Road and how you came to that.
Yeah. First, sorry about that. We've had crazy storms all day, and our power's been in and out. So that's why I dropped off there for a little bit. Yeah, I mean, you know, I hear so many similarities. You know, how it came about was, you know, a little bit of an accident, really. I mean, so Brian, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, had something come up at the last minute, but Brian came across John's story on Facebook originally, actually. Unknowingly, they had some connections. And what he found out later is they actually went to the same high school. We're only a year apart, but they didn't know each other because they ran in different crowds. But they had a connection on Facebook. So he had seen John's story. John had started his walk and had been posting occasionally to friends to kind of let them know how he was doing and how he was processing what he was doing. And Brian was really fascinated by it, and he kind of just took a risk and reached out to him. And, you know, they had like a really long talk, and John, you know, he was not looking to do this at all. Like, he was not looking to bring a couple strangers into his life and start exposing what he was going through and kind of like on screen processing his life and everything that he's been through. But that, they had some kind of trust connection that happens once in a while in life. And John slept on it that night, and he called Brian back the next day, and he's like, all right, well, let's at least sit down and talk and give it a shot, right? And it was right then that Brian told me about it, kind of came out of the blue, and we were both drawn to the story immediately, just because we were like, why is he doing this? And once we got to know John a little bit, the game, it was game over, because John is like this big personality, just gregarious and outgoing and like infectious, and he's kind of a unicorn in a lot of ways, because he's kind of like I always joke with him and others that shared with him that he's like a half Marine, half hippie, because he kind of is. He kind of is like he's always kind of like stepping back and trying to look at things in different ways and stuff. And you see that a lot in the film, because that's just what he does. He tends to just kind of put things out there and let the world deal with them. And and when Brian started visiting John on his walk for 3-4 days at a time, once a month or whatever it was, and we did that for the next year or so, and Brian would be feeding me the Brian would be feeding me the footage back, and started developing what the story could be. And like you guys mentioned earlier, I mean, that process took years. We were both working full time, and we always wanted to make a film together, but how this one came about was a little bit, we just got lucky, to be honest with you. You can have a great story, you can have a really cool subject, you can have all these other things, but if we got lucky in getting this person that was an incredible vessel. And once he realized, he asked himself honestly, he's like, okay, so if you really want to help others, why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you be this voice or try to be this voice? And when he really honestly asked himself that, that's why he decided to kind of try to open himself up a little, which I still consider a miracle, because if I'm him, why the hell do I trust me or Brian? Why? I mean, yeah, I mean, I just feel incredibly blessed, honestly, because my life would have never crossed paths with John, or any of those he served with, or any of the Gold Star families or Blue Star families, or any of them. It just wouldn't have, it just, I don't naturally run in those circles. So, I mean, my life changed because a human being taught me about their world. And it's, you can't unlearn it. You can't not be affected by it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I don't think you could have put that any better. I mean,
yeah, it's so true and so powerful to hear that, because we had a really similar.
You can't unlearn it, and it's like it's just embedded in there. And it's like we've tried to tell people along the way, what we were experiencing, and it was sort of hard to, communicate. Like, this guy's got these stories, and it's like, even when the cameras are off, he would just be going on and on. It like never stopped. It's like you said, you're lucky. You feel lucky as a filmmaker to have this vessel that's willing to just be as honest as they possibly can. Now, Frank was a little more willing.
Well, because
I think he came into this, again, because he's been doing this for so long, and it was the culmination of something for him.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, it was like, and he's really artistic. He's an artist. So, which was even better to have someone, to be able to give his artistic value to, which, ended up being, just incredibly valuable. But it was very much like, put the camera here, you got to shoot this, we got to make sure we do this, you got to, how you guys going to do this? What's going to go here? Like,
and every time he filmed himself, he was bringing his camera, his phone to film people's stories along the way and posting it.
Oh, that's great.
Which again was part of his whole history of documenting. He did it through Vietnam. He documented everything through blog and through selfies, and Skyping. So in doing that, we wanted to incorporate that idea of his self-documentation, because to him, that's part of how he heals. It's him sharing, I'm alone on the road, but I can put a camera up and share it with my viewers out there, my followers. So to us, that was such an important, part of who Frank is and how he tells his story. So we wanted to incorporate it into the film.
There were times, because of the shooting schedule and because, you know, the low budget nature of it, Matt would be, you know, he would meet Frank and Oneata, and they would say, you know, and then he'd call me and be like, oh my God, Frank told me this story you'll never believe. And like, so, you know, we learned about Frank, you know, over the months of filming on the walk and, you know, getting to know him. He opened up to us and telling us like stories about his life that we.
But at the same time, and I'm curious how you guys approached it, because it was, you know, trying to weed out the stuff that's sort of, you know, you want to engage your audience, and you know how long you want to make it. I mean, we started over closer to 2 hours. We're over like an hour 15 now.
Our first cut was 3 hours.
Yeah, it's hard because
not that we ever intended it to look. I mean, our goal was always an hour and a half, but you know, because we knew, like, I mean, just, you know, that I do work with festivals and stuff like that. They don't, that's just, that's where their brain set is at, right? But we knew we actually took that first cut and went down, it was, I think, 18, Memorial Day of 18. We went down to, so a lot of the guys that were in the film were having a reunion and it was at the house of one of the Gold Star families, one of their close friends that had been killed by a sniper in 2004 in Iraq. And they do it every year. And so we went down there and hung out with them, really not planning to do much other than to just show the film to them. That first cut, to get their gut reaction, because it changes when you show somebody something. Like, you think you understand what you're watching, but you don't until you see an audience actually react to it. And when that audience is the exact audience that you're, you know, pretending you know something about, it changes everything. And it changed for us. We took that first 3 hour cut and trashed 2 hours of it, or more than 2 hours of it. And we ended up doing a lot of shooting that weekend that we never planned on doing, which became the core bridge of the film and the emotional arc that it needed. And it directed the rest of the flow of it completely. It changed everything. But we didn't know. I mean, like you guys are saying, it's really interesting how, like, Frank was, you know, he was there, he was ready to tell a story. And for us, when John started his walk, before we were involved, he was a human being who was at his bottom. He was coming off of a suicide attempt and like, you know, alcoholism and all these other things going on in his life. And he was at his bottom. He didn't have anything left. And it was a move of desperation. He started walking because he didn't know what else to do. And it was about him in the beginning. It was about just trying to figure himself out and push himself through physical pain as a distraction for a lot of it, right? We all know people who like to run or spin or whatever, you know, it's a reboot, right? It helps you. And for him, it took him 6,000 miles of rebooting, but, you know, that's what it felt like. And it wasn't until, I'd say, halfway through, I don't know when it was, when he started to process and realize that it was much more about other people than it ever was about him.
Frank's story was almost the exact opposite. It was like,
yeah,
he started off thinking that, you know, he's doing this walk to help other people. He's going to advocate for veterans. And I think through the walk and towards the end, he realized it was about him. You know?
He says it so many times. This is as much about me as it is about everyone else. This is about me moving forward. You know, but that was his moving forward, helping other people and getting them to take that first step that he wasn't able to take, keeps him going. You know, it's what drives him.
And of course it is. No matter what, at the end of the day, it's going to be about both. I mean, there's no way it can't. You can't pull those things apart.
Right. But I'm curious how you kind of sifted through, you know, honoring that story of the veteran, and like you said, like you kind of, you know, it's funny you say you're pretending to know what you're talking about, telling the story.
It still feels like that, man. It still feels.
It started off that way until, you know, we started just embrace our role in it. You know, our role is to tell Frank's story, and it doesn't mean we can't care any less or be, you know, or grow in the way that we look at things or the way that we appreciate our veterans, or, you know, what that means. I mean, the way the American flag's looked at and, you know, adopted by some people and not by others. And it's like, you know, if you just, it just changed the way we look at all that and all people's viewpoints, which I think is Frank's thing too, is like, not just people are, you know, processing PTSD different ways, but they're processing everything different ways. And if more people can embrace just the way that people are processing and appreciate the way that they, you know, arrive at these decisions, or the, you know, the viewpoints they have in their life, then I think more people would just, you know, get along
and just talk to other people, because I think sometimes we make assumptions, you know, and you may just judge someone or think about something without asking the questions. And I think we may not fully understand, but
listening.
Yeah,
and
listening.
it's something Frank taught us, is just like, you just have to listen.
Shut up and listen. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a
It's
storyteller,
yeah.
as a filmmaker and storyteller, it's hard. And a director, you want to get out there and you want to kind of control
You want to direct. You want to, yeah, you want to know where the story's going, and it's not, you know, it's just not. I mean, that one of the most beautiful things about docs is that whatever the hell you wrote down and thought you were going to make is thrown away in about 10 minutes, and will be thrown away 100 more times in the next year or 2 years or whatever it is, because of one thing that someone says, or one arc that develops you never saw coming. You know, they're fun, you know, docs are a lot of fun for that respect. They're a very different world, but you know, they you try to stay out of the way and not, you know, I mean, every doc is still, you're still manipulating the story, right? No matter how much you want to not do it, you're still editing, you're still choosing what to show, what not to show. You're still choosing to highlight a particular inflection or tone or whatever it is that you're doing. So, but you desperately want to just tell and represent what's there in front of you. But it's hard. You guys are right. It's
but like you said, listening, you know, I think the best documentary filmmakers are the ones that listen the best. And I think it's a skill that, you know, we're developing.
It's easier said than done.
Of course it is, but I think the best, you know, you're going to get the most out of somebody when you listen to them, and I think it's
that's what these guys taught me. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, feel the same way. I you know, like you were saying, like we made a decision, like it was honestly maybe even before we started editing or doing anything other than just gathering footage, is that we were like, look, this film has to not be partisan in any way. Like, I don't even want to touch that crap. Like, and it doesn't, you know, like same thing you guys said, like the most, you know, it was just an amazing experience because of what it did selfishly for myself to open, you know, like getting to know people you don't normally get to know is the greatest thing you can do, no matter what. And it's just, you know, and being kind of in doing that, because you know, it does not matter and hanging out with these guys if we feel the same about stuff. At least that's what I've learned, is at the end of the day, we don't need to share the same views about everything. We can still learn about each other, we can still gain empathy, and we can still, what I think all three of us would say, or three films would say, is the most important thing is that bridge between those that hold the knowledge, the veterans, and those that don't, and have a wall built up because they don't have the knowledge, you know. So, you know, when you kind of let go, which is what it felt like when you're kind of part of that process for years, you know, you're just like, it's a really freeing experience to like just let go and listen to other people.
I agree, and I think too many of us in this society, we tend to not listen as much, and we want to talk, we want to tell our opinions or whatever, but if you can stop talking and listen, you know, and when you're making a documentary film, it kind of allows you that opportunity to listen and stop talking. And like you said, I mean, that's the best way you're going to learn about something that you don't understand, is by listening. And the partisan thing is something that definitely has come up a lot in our conversations, because
well, Frank, we and Frank, none of us wanted to go near that at all. Also, and it was interesting because, you know, we started way up in Buffalo, coming through, you know, Western New York, which is one thing, and then ending up.
Oh yeah, that state's very different. Yeah.
And ending up in Queens, New York, which is a totally different thing. Long Island. Frank's family is extremely diverse. The people that were on the ground crew are from all walks of life, all political spectrums, you know. We got into some conversations, you know, some late night got heated, you know. It always ended well. It was always for a good cause. It it was always, you know, look, we're all doing this together. These things don't matter. And the fact that we could come together and do something like that, you know, and get up the next morning and you know, put our hands in and be a team and do this thing together. I mean, to us, that spoke volumes about the potential of people out there, you know.
Yeah, there's this divide that it's almost artificial. It's like like a wedge put between people that I think, you know, politicians tend to do. And when you talk to someone,
yeah,
you realize
they
that
tell us to live in a
common
box.
most times than not. And veterans, I mean,
well, more than that, you love these people. I mean,
Yeah.
those are people that I now call family and will forever, and never would have if not for this project. And that's what changed.
Yeah.
It's not, 'cause
That
it's
right
not
there
just
says it all, doesn't it?
everybody
Right.
out there. It's no matter what lawn, so you know what kind of signs on your lawn. It's like, you know, you can still like end up loving that person. You have no idea, you know.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, I like I said, you know, I can't really think of a better word than blessed. Like, I mean, you know, John, I mean, like, you know, like I will love him for the rest of my life. I mean, you know, and some of the guys that I got to get to meet because like, I mean, yeah, and would we agree about everything if we hung out? No, but I don't care. Like, I mean, that's, you know, like at the end of the day, like,
And that's awesome. And that's changed the way I look at everything. The way I look at the news. It's the way I look at all information. The way I look at new people I meet or new opportunities that come my way.
yeah.
I got a question for you guys. Just if you don't mind me changing the subject to this question.
You're doing a lot of talking.
No, it's good. No, I'm loving it. Because I didn't expect this to happen with my film. I don't know if it's happening to your films or not, but because my film specifically is about post-traumatic stress and solutions made for anybody battling post-traumatic stress, I thought that audience would be like, oh, solutions? I got to see this film, because that's why I produced it for them. The opposite has happened, where I've learned that they're not watching the film because they're afraid to. They're afraid that it's going to be triggers watching it. They're going to remind themselves of their own trauma. And I've seen people on Facebook and LinkedIn, first responders, veterans, promoting my film, encouraging others to watch it, only for me to find out 2 months later, they've never even seen it because they're afraid to watch it. But based on what everyone else has told them, they're promoting it because, well, I heard from all these people I trust, so that's why I'm promoting it. I'm like, well, you need to watch it. So my biggest struggle right now is trying to figure out how to get these people who need to see it to actually not be so afraid of it, so that they will see it and get the help.
I would say the number one piece, you know, I don't know whether our film is a little further down the line or whatever it is, but what I've learned is that we 1,000% deal with that, of course. I mean, what I learned early on in making this project is that, you know, PTS isolates you to the point where your brain doesn't have the natural mirror that we all hope to have, where our logic is bouncing off of other things and not being isolated in its own head and making up its own stuff. But, you know, the brain is always going to find ways to process, unhealthy or not. And one of the things that some veterans do is that they will watch YouTube clips that purposely trigger things. You know, it may be about combat, it may be photo montages, it may be watching reunions of guys come home. There's a lot of things it could be. So there does get to a point where they do have to be careful of triggers, and it's an issue. You know, our film is a roller coaster, and we wanted it to be, because we knew that, yes, this is heavy stuff, but we wanted John's hilarious personality to come out too, so that people had that relief and that ride. And to realize that, you know, at the end of the day, this is ultimately about hope, no matter how hard and heavy it is. But yeah, I mean, I think it's patience. Like I really, documentaries have a different life than regular film. They can rise and fall in relevance and topicality over the course of years or even a decade. And, you know, I think when it comes to, you know, like our goal now at this point, we kind of had a little moment in the sun, but our goal at this point is yours. Like, how do we get as many people that can actually benefit from this, right? And it includes civilians, of course, but, you know, the first goal is, how do you get it to veterans that are isolating now, that are vulnerable to those horrible suicide statistics? how do you get it to the families that have already been through something horrible,
Mhm.
and or lost somebody either in combat or after they came home? And a lot of it's patience, consistence, doing things like this, like, but I think it's kind of a compiling effect over time. I mean, like, we absolutely have had people say, we had people in the festivals walk out because it was too much. It was
Wow.
too much. And they might have watched it later in some cases, or they might not have. But, at that, it's a tough thing to watch, to make, you're asking, it's a big ask.
This is a hard.
It's a big ask.
There's a reason that it's a stigma. There's a reason people have a hard time taking that first step. There's a reason that families don't want to admit that someone they love have a problem. I mean, it's not an easy subject to sell, and like, we're fortunate that like we are riding this wave of everyone's kind of talking about mental health finally, like, addressing it in the schools and seeing, on the news. And it's something that at least people know what you're talking about when you talk about PTSD or mental health issues. And there's awareness months and there's things like that. But, the individual, like you said, it's everyone process is different. So how one person might, might see your film, our film, 100 other people might see it all different ways. So it's
Yeah.
tough, and all we can kind of hope is that what we try to do is show different perspectives. And one in particular was Frank's best friend, who he enlisted with, and went through all those with, and Frank, saw Frank get blown up, and they both went divergent paths, and we kind of revisit Pete later, and their two perspectives on the war is completely opposite, and it's kind of showing like it's okay, and they still hug, and Pete still walks with Frank and still supports him even though he might not agree with what he's doing, or that it's that PTSD is even an issue for him or not, but he's obviously isolated. He only
Or that they should talk about it. There's always, there's a lots. Yeah, Pete was really interesting to see, because the contrast was so big, and it was so obvious when he showed up in the story, and it was, you see it in his face and his eyes.
We couldn't believe
his posture.
It was such a mind-blowing moment. We've been hearing about Pete for so long. When we finally got set up that interview, and it was near the end of the shoot, we hit Bay Shore because that's where he lives, and it was just the nicest guy you can meet. But it was just after knowing Frank for so long at that point, it was just like, wow. And even after having met so many different people, so many different perspectives, it's like, here's this guy whose story I heard, and just you develop a picture in your head and you meet him, and it's not what you picture at all. And it's mind blowing.
But in terms of who was going to watch the movie and who is going to be affected by it, I mean, it's definitely a tough thing. I mean, our hope is that, not only to try to get veterans to see it, but if the people that are close to the veterans, with the family members,
Exactly, the families. Yep.
just to be able to understand maybe a little bit better what they're dealing with. Because I think that one of the things we heard over and over again is that, my uncle was in the war in Iraq and never talked about it,
or my son's having issues and I don't know how to approach him about it. So the family thing, the contagiousness of the disease is what Frank always says about it.
So we could just shine a light a little bit and let someone understand maybe a little bit better.
And I think if you let those families know that they're hurt, I feel like that's like kind of like, a group that doesn't have a voice. It's these families that suffer, because they're the ones that are dealing with the abuse and the, whatever it is, and they're developing their own PTSD. It's like generational PTSD. So I think, going after the families and the people that are affected in the peripherals, really, really important.
I had somebody yesterday, a wife of military guy. He's at the very top of the military. He's the SEAC, SEAC. He's the advisor to the top general in the country. That this general oversees all branches. He's his advisor. His wife, Janet, said yesterday to me that exact same thing. She said, in regards to our film, because her and her husband watched the film, but she said, you have no idea the impact your film and all of our films are going to have on the families, because their loved ones, when they get help and they get better and they can handle post-traumatic stress, or find a way to battle through it, she said that change in our family structure is going to affect everybody around them so positively. She said, you have no idea what your film has done. And again, I'm relating that to all three of us, because you're right. the family. There are so many affected. And if we can get the help to the people who are battling, that solves the problem for everybody around them, which is great. And we had another lady a couple of weeks ago, or months ago, it's been a little while, I guess, but she said, I have my husband back after he tried a treatment in the film. And then she also said, our children have their father back. Now, what a great statement for her to say, my children have their father back, I have my husband back, when for years they had all been suffering because of that one man's post-traumatic stress. Now it's behind him, which means it's not behind the family. They can heal, they can move on together. I mean, that's powerful.
That's everything. I mean, that's a life, really. At the end of the day,
Exactly.
that's a life that, you know, hopefully never becomes part of the 20 a day. And that's the ultimate, is like, you'll never see that stuff, and but that really, that is the best thing you can possibly hear. I mean, we even saw some of that while it was happening. I mean, obviously a ton of stuff doesn't make the film, but a lot of spouses or girlfriends or moms or whatever it may be that would tell us that even John coming to visit them the one time was something that pried something loose in them. And like, for them to see, like, for the spouse to see John with them and to see that interaction. So like you were alluding to earlier, is like, PTSD teaches you to isolate, and this is a big country, so you're scattered to the winds, and all those things are against you. And so if there's one thing money probably should be spent on the most, is funding these reunions, like twice a year, whatever it is, right? Pay for their flights, pay for a house for them to hang out in for a weekend.
Absolutely.
Like, throw money at that, and because it changes these guys. It's a reboot that is something like they can't get anywhere else, and they take that back home. And then if a family member or a spouse actually gets lucky enough to witness how their face, their body posture, everything about them changes when they're around those guys. John is such an amazing public speaker. Something he would say all the time is that, as much as this is for veterans, this is even more for civilians, even more for the families, because what it can do for them is immeasurable. We can't see it the same way as, like you're saying, and it's just, it's the few times I got lucky enough to witness it in person, it's something that shakes you to your core, because like, when you see a veteran around the people that they served with, I mean, you don't find bonds like that in too many other ways. And it just teaches you about what I mean, we can kind of try and imagine that, okay, so obviously they were in the most high pressure situation you can think of, and they were forced to kind of become a unit and all of that. But we lose sight of that when they come home, they lose that. So their greatest strength, their superpower, gets taken away. That together is their superpower. And
Exactly.
I will also say, and this is a complaint that we heard from Frank and from a lot of veterans that met along the way, is that, like, not only did Hollywood never ever do that justice, but it's done harm to it. I mean, it never
immeasurable harm.
I mean, not only does it not show the pain of war, but I mean that connection, that kind of, just what these guys go through. I mean, you can't tell it in a story, and it was one of the reasons we wanted to stay away from anything feeling like a Vietnam War movie, or like trying to glorify that idea of it, because it's like, Frank always talks about the fact that, it's everything that happened after that caused this. If none of the stuff that had happened after had happened, and he had just gotten wounded in Vietnam, he feels like maybe he would have been able to deal with it, and that never gets shown in there's a few movies maybe here, but in general, it's something that gets completely just left out. So, I feel as our responsibility, like you said, as civilian filmmakers, is to kind of build this community of family, like just for veterans to know that we are out there, trying to tell the real story.
It's a tough subject, like you said. It's not a comedy. It's a hard story to talk about. And I think what all of us are doing, which is a really good thing, is just adding something to the conversation and just having the conversation, keeping it going, and just having an open conversation about it,
and bringing our people in, all our friends, and just everyone that we know and colleagues that would not be in that world or would not engage in a veteran film or whatever. It's just like, it's trying to just open up people's eyes into that it's not a veteran thing. Why does it have to be this or that? Why why isn't that interesting to you? It's a human story. So if you can make it and tell the human side of it, which is just overflowing, these guys are just overflowing with the human side of it. It's right there for the taking, then hopefully people react.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a long game. I mean, that's the way I look at it, is that I think you won't see a lot of it, but the word of mouth that can happen in so many different ways. I mean, from one family to the next, it says like, hey, look, I realize you think that your son or daughter maybe isn't in the place for this, but when we, this really helped us in some way, right? So like, I think that thing happens. There's it may take a while to bridge outside of the veteran community, and sometimes, but it is such a tight knit community itself that I think over time, a lot of that can happen.
Well, it is. We're on our way. I mean, Frank also references the difference in the way he came home from Vietnam to the way that soldiers are coming home now. I mean, it's a huge step, and being embraced, and ads showing fathers coming home and their kids running to their arms. I mean, we're starting to understand that side, I think, as a society, but it's just beginning.
Yeah, well, we're detached. I mean, I can, I feel like my generation, and I grew up a military brat, but my dad got out when I was fairly young, so it's not like that was this massive imprint, but it was a pretty big imprint because my dad's always been my hero. So basically, anything he ever did or stood for, I looked up to. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah.
And then there's an interesting question that came up a lot, which is like, and a lot of favorite Frank supporters who love him and love what he's doing would ask him, like, what's your goal here? Like, we have to go to war. Like, are you trying to get people, like, are you hoping like kids, like, get recruited down, or what's the goal here? Like, these are the off-camera conversations that we would have. And like,
Oh yeah.
A lot of times Frank didn't have the answer, but for him, it was really just about, just rethinking the way that we approach the whole system.
Just about education too. So not that it's going to eliminate PTSD, but at least if people that are going to the military understand,
if they had a heads up,
like that they understand a little bit about it and what it is, and they can look for it and be prepared for it, then it might make it a little bit better on the other end. I mean, that's part of what he's trying to do, is that education is the key to improving the situation. Marilyn actually had an interesting question. I'm curious what you guys think. She asked if we had mental health professionals or resources on hand when we were filming, and if we were concerned that we would trigger someone. And the mental health professional is another audience, I think, that could benefit from these films, because I think a lot of therapists and social workers may not have had experience with veterans. For us, we didn't have therapists on board, and Frank was very open about the fact that he wasn't a therapist.
He's not a social worker, he's not a clinician, he's just a guy. I mean, he says this to everyone he meets.
We avoided it on purpose for the most part. We were there. Look, there's a lot of films out there that take that angle. But we had one clinician in our film, and the only reason he was probably in it is because he actually served with John for years after Ramadi in Human Intel, and he was in the same hole John was, basically the same thing. And he eventually pulled himself out of it, went back to school, became a doctor and a clinician that started working with veterans. So like he went full circle all the way. So we felt like it was I mean, using him was an incredible moment for us because he knew John and because of all of that. But for the most part, we actually tried to stay away from the clinician angle because it just wasn't like a lot of the problems that, the barriers to get built either in the VA or in the private clinical world, whatever, were just not what we wanted to approach. It wasn't going to help. And the human story just seemed like a much better bridge.
We actually met with several and, had long, in-depth interviews about all these topics and their treatments and this and that. And what actually we did end up leaving, the only bite, we had 2 short bites with clinicians in the film. And the only thing it was to back up the idea that by taking that first step, that statistics shown over the years that by taking that first step leads to recovery and prevention of suicide. And that was really, it was really just to back up that claim of that first step. But
that therapy might not be perfect, but it's better.
But we went through that conversation. Like, we have all these great testimonials, but do we want it to be that? Like, do we want people to then, question what's out there, or like have to start raising those questions that we didn't really have the answers to in the film itself? I mean,
what about you, Michael? Because I know that you did talk to therapists and you were talking to different physicians.
Yeah, well, in the film, we definitely talked to therapists and doctors and other experts, but mostly because we were introducing, for many people, new treatments and programs they'd never heard of. And so, most people want to make sure it's not just something someone created in their little tent and are now trying to offer to the world, that these have doctors behind them, why they work in their doctor expert opinion. If there's any issues with it, if there's any, what the success rate is. I mean, just getting it from somebody who knows what they're talking about. In our case, it was, I think, important to sell it to the audience that this procedure has been vetted. So we, first of all, interviewed a lot of veterans and first responders that benefited from it. So you hear their firsthand experience of where they were suicidal. Some of them had tried to take their lives by suicide, had lost their jobs, families, lost everything. They were a mess. And how now, after trying one of these things that we featured in the film, they have their lives back. Many of them, I know sometimes people say you can't get rid of post-traumatic stress. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to say if you can, but I've talked to so many who told me I no longer have post-traumatic stress. It's no longer affecting my life. So because of that, I tend to believe that people can get rid of it, since I'm hearing so many who have. But to convince the audience, I think you need to hear from those who have succeeded. And you also need to hear from the doctors who can say, here are the studies that were done. Here's where those studies were published. Here's why it is accepted. These are the hospitals or the VA or wherever that these procedures are taking place, which gives it validity. So that's why I ended up choosing to put those types of people in there to help encourage them to see that not only are veterans and first responders benefiting, but in addition to that, this is why the experts say it's a viable solution as well.
Then to the other part of the question was about the trigger. I mean, we did often talk a lot about that one person that's isolated watching this movie that might be angry, maybe doesn't want to watch the movie, doesn't want to hear Frank's story. He's got his own story to tell. And that was always on our minds, and we kind of always had that faith in that. We didn't see that happen with Frank, and if when his honesty in person was able to influence people, we just had faith that if we can tell the story honestly, that it would influence people the same way.
And then we really couldn't speak from a larger perspective of, I mean, it's such a big topic and so many different, I mean, like we said, everyone deals with it differently. All we could do is tell Frank's story, because that's the perspective we knew, or that, that's the perspective we were coming from.
I think Papa Ron had a question.
Yeah.
Papa Ron? You're muted.
I got 1,000 questions.
Good.
So, sometimes I ask the question to recommend viewing a film, and it's in therapy, the therapists and the counselors in the room will know what countertransference is sometimes we're tempted to transpose our experience on to someone else and make sure they experience it the way they're supposed to. My dad, hardened battleship USS Columbia. It was a heavy cruiser, really got beat up in World War II. He could watch Civil War and even Vietnam War movies, but he could not do documentaries and movies about his war.
Mm.
And I think he could kind of halfway process some of that stuff. I mean, my dad was never in therapy. His therapy was a popping John Deere tractor plowing for days and days and days. That's how he just drowned out the noise. And good dad. I mean, but that was one thing because it was just too close to home. But if he could see it at a distance, he could kind of get through it. That was one thing that I'm asking the whole thing and let y'all just go. Mark, you talked about something that struck home. A lady I know, her dad, Vietnam vet, just a hardened battle warrior kind of guy. And she said after he got out of the military, had 5 daughters, very successful home, business, everything, just like a very successful person. She said all of that to her seemed like it was second place to that 2 years he spent in Vietnam. That was like it was like that. Nothing compared to that, and nothing compares to war. Nothing. I mean, except war. That was the other one. I have a question. When you were doing this work for the 4 of you who were doing this work on these films, were there times you broke down and just like you had to get away from it? And that was my other question. And then when you say you didn't have therapists, I always go to the thing I like art. I hate
building manufacturer, and we actually manufacture the buildings here in Colorado.
Oh, I don't know. I like somebody.
I'm sorry.
I say I like art. I hate posters. Art lets me think, and posters tell me what to think. I like stories. I hate lectures because stories let me think, and and lectures tell me what to think. So I'm going to turn you loose. Y'all can respond how you want to.
A lot.
I mean, I like that, man. I like that. My brain works that way. I like to stare at stuff and figure out what it's telling me and why I'm bringing what I'm bringing to the table for it to tell me that. Because that's all, that's what we are when we walk up to something, whether it's a book or a film or whatever it is. We're seeing ourselves being engaged with something as much as we're actually seeing whatever was put there. So, but yeah, I mean, I can tell you that in terms of the high of war, I can tell you over and over and over again. I heard people say that one of the things that is tough for them to talk about is that combat is a high that is never, ever going to be reached again. It is a heightened sense of awareness and vigilance and emotion that you don't even necessarily, you realize that what the danger and everything else that's going around you, but you don't realize you're having your system rewired. And you do not, when you come home, I heard people say over and over, the stunning shock that you have no way to get that again is very tough. It's a very difficult part of the transition, and it's something that sticks with them. You can find really bad ways to try and chase that. From as simple things as like anger to things that can take your life.
Heroin addicts call it chasing the dragon. The only thing that's going to match heroin is heroin. It's like it's like I don't like to make that comparison, but you're right. It's like nothing compares. And when you get that thing, the other thing was the therapist thing. I wanted to. So like if you have therapists around when you're doing filming and watching that, they kind of get duty bound if they're in scope to report and intervene, things like that. So I can understand why you wouldn't want them there.
Mhm.
But what about the is it too close? Is it, is it too close for some of these veterans, or too soon?
Um, uh, yeah, I mean, that can only be decided by them, of course. Now, granted, so we had, you know, again, I have to say, in terms of how lucky we got, the reason why the people that talk to us, the families, the siblings, the loved ones, the other veterans talk to us is because of John. Like people trust him. And when he vouched for us, that was it. That was the end of the conversation. If he said, you know, I want you to do this, if you can do it, they would do it, right? Doesn't mean everyone did. There were plenty of people that couldn't go there. And if there were plenty of people John reached out to on his walk that just weren't not bringing somebody into your home to bring all that up, you do have to be in a certain place, right? And of course, not everyone could do that. I don't know what the numbers were in terms of how many said yes and how many said no, but there were plenty. And and that's even without bringing us into the equation. That's just him. Can you imagine the level of trust it takes to bring some stranger with a camera into your house who's going to ask you questions with zero clue really as to what, like you try really hard, but it doesn't matter how many veterans I meet for the rest of my life. If I spent every waking moment for the rest of my life with veterans, I will never, ever understand, ever. And I can try, and I believe the trying part is extremely important because it's what makes us make progress.
Mhm.
But I have to always remind myself, I can't understand, ever. I don't know what it's like to wake up and be thinking about death all day. I don't. It doesn't matter what I've been through in my own life. It's not the same. So yeah, there definitely. You also asked, like, were there moments that it was too much for yourself? Yes, sure, but I tried to tell myself to never walk away because of that. There were moments that it was overwhelming. I can tell you and I was removed from a lot of it, right? Like Brian did a lot of the filming on his own in the beginning, and I was there for a decent amount of stuff at the end. But I can tell you, just from being the guy that was watching hundreds of hours of footage till their eyes bled, and from 24 hours a day, I can tell you that I broke down a lot, a lot. But I tried to. It was a conscious decision on my part to try and push through it, because I felt like if they're willing to do this, I need to push myself to be able to handle that, I guess, as the best as I can. It felt like I felt like I was, it just felt like this unbelievable honor to be able to work on it. So I just felt a responsibility that I needed to put most of that aside to be able to create something.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, Mark, I totally agree. As a civilian, I feel a tremendous, I feel honored to go and tell the story, but also, a responsibility, because we're never going to really understand. All we can do is try to tell the story the best that we can. And there's no way we'll ever know, because we didn't fight in those wars. For me, as a filmmaker, you try to train yourself when you're in these emotional situations. The camera kind of acts as a barrier in a way, and when you're behind that lens, you might, something you may be getting emotional with in the moment. You try to train yourself, just focus on make sure it's in focus, make sure you have the shot. You try to think about it from a technical perspective, because
you're trying to take yourself out of it.
Trying to take yourself out.
Yeah.
And then, but then again, when you're watching the footage, like you said, there's definitely.
Well, that's when you're reliving it. You're breaking down. It's months later when you're just like watching this conversation that you remember, that you can't believe happened, and it's just as emotional to you today as it was, 6 months ago when he shot it.
It could actually be more emotional because, as you said, when you're filming it, you're thinking about so many other things. The shot's right, the focus is there. There's a lighting change. If there's a window, you're thinking about so many other things. And then when you're editing, to just sit there and watch it and fully watch it, you're like, whoa, that's powerful.
Yeah. You can't cry while you're giving an interview. It's not, it doesn't work well. So like, that definitely happened to me. Like I definitely remember being kind of gape mouthed many times, like during interviews, but being a mess weeks later and looking at it again.
Yeah.
And our experience varies a little bit because we had Frank, who was sort of this angel on our shoulder the whole time. He was the subject, but then once we'd have these like moving conversations, we'd leave the room with Frank, and he would be there with us to be like, holy shit, like, did you see that? Like, we would debrief together, and it would be either like, plus he's there to lift up these people, so it was like, as down as it was getting, he's trying there to inspire. So he wouldn't let it go to those places. It was kind of there to like, let's talk about this, and let's not get it there. We're just gonna talk about it like two people and just lay our cards out on the table. And
for Frank, it was all about moving forward. Like that was his mantra. Like
it's about ripping that Band-Aid off. So he didn't like to go down those places where it was like, let's cry about this. He liked to like rip the Band-Aid off and let's start to heal. To tell me your issues and like, what are you doing? What are you doing in your life to fix it? what are the problems you're having? And it was funny because you get guys talking about schizophrenia, losing their families, and like they're telling you it as though they're reading a script and a story. Like a lot of these guys, they weren't breaking down and telling us their story. It was, well, this happened and this happened and this happened and I lost my wife and my kids, and it's like, it almost even more forces you into those shoes of like the reality of what these guys have gone through. It's not this drama that's written out. It's these guys' lives that they're just kind of like laying out for you. It makes it real.
Yep.
Yeah, very real.
So I was going to say to Marilyn, because she wrote, she's heard that sometimes the best therapists are veterans working with other veterans. And one of the organizations that I love, 220.org, because they're doing such great work. Their whole focus is peer-to-peer. And so they've got people who are trained with their particular protocol at every aspect: firefighters, police officers, 911 dispatchers, every branch of the military. And so if somebody calls in and needs help, he'll have an Air Force person call back that Air Force veteran, because they know even the different branches are very different. So having that peer-to-peer support and somebody who can help them through it, walk them through the protocol that can change their life, they can open up much faster and quicker with somebody who they know understands them, because even though they don't know them personally yet, but they still know they can understand them, because you fought fires, I fought fires. You were a police officer, I was a police officer. Now they can heal.
I have a question for you guys about that, related to that. Like, we had a question last night at one of our Q&As about a young guy asked us about, the difference between soldiers that serve now with all the technological advances and, and how is it different, how they relate. It was interesting to hear Frank's response and some of the other guys on the stage. But I'm curious, Mark, if you've seen, it's John, right? The character.
John, yep.
So I'm curious if John interacts, if he interacts with other soldiers from other wars, is it just his guys? And with you, Michael, too, do you see the treatment coming from like one group more than another? And I'm just, curious what your take is on the difference and how different generations are approaching this problem.
From what again, John's a bit of a unicorn, I realize, but like, I never saw him have put up or any kind of barrier. I mean, he got approached very frequently on his walk by Vietnam veterans, and had stories that people would say like about their fathers that were in World War II and they were in Vietnam. I mean, like, yes, it does, of course, happen sometimes, because generational things, I think, more than anything, might put up barriers than you would be differences in combat. I mean, I never saw John like do anything but look at it as all the same. Like, I mean, granted, yes, the kind of combat that was experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan was different in a lot of respects, but the bottom line is the effects, were what they think about, I think, when they talk to each other. I mean, I just never saw that, the barriers that I know that they happen.
Like, it seemed to us that the Vietnam vets, the group in and of itself, like,
Yeah,
they seem to
definitely.
reach out to other veteran groups. They kind of, it's the Vietnam guys, they stick
They had a very unique experience, as you know. I mean, look, I mean, the public consciousness matters a lot, right? And we all know that, like, during World War II, the Greatest Generation and all of that, like, it was a cause that for 99% of people, they didn't do anything but say, hell yeah, of course we have to do this, right? And when they came home, well, look, there were plenty that weren't welcomed home, and there were a lot of other reasons for that, but it was different back then. And so what, Vietnam was very different because they were not welcomed home. And that's one thing John talks about a lot, is that the importance of just saying welcome home. Doesn't matter how long they've been home. If it's been 50 years, they still deserve to be said that you're welcome here. And in the beginning of the conflict that we've been fighting now for 25 years, or 20 years, they weren't welcomed home either. And some of those attitudes started to change a little bit, but still they deal with it quite a lot. We are a insanely privileged country that is bubbled from almost everything that goes on in the world outside of our own bubble. We don't really understand why we have that bubble, and the fact that no matter what you believe or side you think you're on, like, I mean, you can step back and see some of that. These are volunteers today, all of them, and their job is not to question why they're being sent. Their job is to be ready. Their job is to be ready, and that's what they did. And and so they felt it's tough. It's tough to come home and feel like you're not welcome, to feel like you were somehow part of some governmental decision that you, of course, had nothing to do with.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because everyone, close to me that I've told, even when we started making this film, that we were doing this, I'd get around to the part that, when Frank enlisted, and that always surprised everyone. I'm like, why'd that surprise you? And they're like, well, just assumed he was drafted. It's like, well, why'd you assume that?
Oh yeah, people don't understand the numbers. Yeah,
like you said, it's that perception of the Vietnam War. It's just like,
yeah, a ton of people volunteered. Yeah, that's what Hollywood did, right? They made us think everyone was forced into going. That's not. I mean, my father volunteered to go. He didn't end up going because they wouldn't let him. But I can tell you, that was the very first thing he did after he got out of school, was he walked up and volunteered. A lot of people volunteered to go to Vietnam, just like every other conflict.
I think there might be some questions. We should probably jump and see if anybody has, because I know they're all muted, I think, but does anybody have questions?
Marilyn, do you want
I wanted to, sorry, Brian.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to comment. I've seen, Michael and I have conversed, and I've watched the film with my husband, Matt and Ryan and Mark. You don't know, was a police dispatcher, retired police dispatcher. My husband's police officer, retired. But I watched Michael's with my husband, and I'll tell you, I cried through it, and so did he. Not because it was horrific, but the fact that somebody was even acknowledging this was happening, and that there was really help out there, and that it's okay. But I tell everybody I meet, people really need to see it. And I think that the 3 productions here, that you guys being civilians sharing that story, means a lot more than if it was a first responder who had created that film. And I think that gives a little more credibility. And Michael, I share him all over the place. and Ryan and Matt, I have watched Frank's story, and correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't he talk about Charlie's house? Is it Charlie's house?
Richard's
And
house.
and Marilyn had asked about like therapists and that. But if I'm remembering correctly, there was a person there because you can't drink that broke that rule, and that he later then connected with Frank about it and they got him back on track. I think what Marilyn said is so true, that another vet, sitting with another vet
Mm-hmm.
and sharing and supporting lots of times will do more than what a therapist who does not understand does. And that's why 22-0 is so important. And I believe in those guys too. And Mark, sorry, I haven't seen John's story yet, so that'll have to go next on the list. But as you guys were talking, I was thinking about, you know, Remembrance Day and that week of showing movies and past old war movies and stuff. This would be an ideal thing to have, and I think for families to see together during those times. Whether, I know Michael, you're doing people are supporting you in having groups for first responders, but it's really the families that really need to understand that we're not broken, we're just different now, and we have different moral values and stuff because of what we've gone through, and that it's important for them to understand we're not angry at them. You know, they just have to understand that we're just maybe not the same. Let go.
Yeah, John, one of the things that comes up, or came up a lot in filming, and it shows up in the actual audio of the film as well, is that, you know, John says all the time, and the people he served with, is that we're not victims, we're survivors, and that's how they need others to understand how important it is to think that way. It's not just them telling themselves that that's what they need us to understand that. So
yeah, Frank's very clear about that too. He talks about, you know, that when you live with PTSD, you're a survivor, and it's very clear to call himself a survivor and to talk about people that, you know, are survivors of PTSD. And Janet, thank you for that, because, you know, there's a bit of an insecurity as a civilian telling these stories, so I appreciate hearing that.
It was nice that Frank's family too, that you guys, not all of them spoke, but the ones that did, about their time with their dad and how things have changed. That's so important for us to realize, and for our family members. And I know I shared it with my son and his and his partner. I said, and they have a friend who was in the military going through PTS, and I said, just share it. Like, family needs to understand that, you know, not everybody can be on that other call. You talk about crying while you're watching that, but if you start crying while you're filming, you're not being of service. And me as a police dispatcher or a military person doing their job, or a police officer, we have to put all those emotions down, because if I'm emotionally upset for that person, I'm not doing them any service or any favors. And for other people to realize, like, I know that I had found before I went through treatment, was that I had totally disconnected with my emotions and feelings. I didn't know how to have fun anymore. I didn't understand. I didn't realize that that was happening to me. That, you know, sure, you laugh at things and that, but I mean, the actual fact of, I find that there was a night, and I wrote a piece 10 years later that I called the night the mask cracked, because that's what happened. You wear this mask, it's so tight on, you had everything buried down, and I was injured in an accident, and I couldn't keep busy enough to keep that down, and it all came up. And I think that we can go of different routes. We can go the drug route. We can, George, I think it was Chris was talking about addiction. So we're addicted to it. If we can't keep that addiction being busy, holding that down, something's got to give. So that's why I think your stories you're producing these stories and directing them.
The takeaway from Richard's house was, you know, they talked about idle hands. You know, all these guys had tasks. They all had jobs to do. If they didn't get the kitchen cleaned up, the chores done, they didn't do certain things, they didn't have TV, they didn't get to go out or do whatever, you know. It was really interesting. And some of these guys, I think it was part of needing that, you know, that the regiments, the daily regiment that they had in the military to sort of keep them going. For other guys, it's just having a watchful eye. But yeah, a lot of these guys did sort of come along as part of our family. You know, Frank called it the Walk with Frank family. Like to walk with Frank was a philosophy. Like, you now walk with Frank, you wear the pin, you got the hat, like you're part of the team, like whether you like it or not, you know? Unfortunately, yeah, you know, COVID hit, and, you know, we did try to stay in touch with as many of these guys as possible. And as great as a lot of them are doing, some not so great. So it's, you know, just further validates what we're doing and why it's so important.
And like you said, Mark, like when you are in the military, you have this brotherhood, you know, where you're with your sisterhood, or, you know, you have a connection, your family. And then when you get out, a lot of the veterans feel like they're isolated when they're in regular life, and they don't have that same connection. Well, Richard's house was that it's a transition home in Rochester, New York, and it was a really special place. I mean, partially because of that family atmosphere. And I think a lot of the veterans that stayed there really responded to that.
I mean, they eat dinner every night together. It's like, it's a rule where we are all at the table at 6 o'clock for dinner. That speaks volumes, you know, just symbolically why they do that. It's that family mentality. And like you guys were talking about before, about therapists being veterans, or having that, like a police officer speaking to another police officer. We had a lot of veterans. Even Peter, the Frank's best friend, at the end of the film, talks about how he only can relate to combat veterans. Like that was, you know, that's who he relates to, and that's who he talks to. And that's okay to him. Like, that's all right. That's how he deals with it.
And we had some veterans really skeptical, like even with Frank, like, oh, are you a social worker? Like, I don't want to talk. And I know that people, like veterans, are suspicious of a therapist or a social worker, especially if they're not if they haven't served and they don't understand that experience. So I think those organizations,
and I think it's partly just because of their experience trying to be fit into a box with social workers or treatments in the past. They're just like, what box are you guys trying to fit me in? Which is not what we were trying.
Right,
and I think you guys too. I think
there's nothing wrong with a therapist not being a veteran, but I think those organizations, like you're talking about, that try to pair a veteran with another veteran, or at least somebody that has an understanding, it helps. But that's tough. You know, it's tough when you have this experience that other people are going to have a hard time understanding.
I mean, look, just from your experience with John and Michael, your experience with your treatment, it's like the treatment comes from seeking it out, and from connection, whether it's connection with someone that has a solution, or connection to brothers in arms,
or both. Brother in arms who does have the solution.
Yeah, I just think it's so.
Just awareness that it's there.
There's different things that different people respond to different treatments, and different, everyone's different with the way that they kind of handle the trauma.
Absolutely.
But it all starts with connecting. I mean, it's all about connecting in some way to somebody for some reason.
And Frank talks about the first step. I mean, it's the hardest thing, and whatever that first step is for you, whether it's making that phone call to a friend, or just saying it out loud, or just talking to your wife, or whatever. I mean, it's whatever that first step is always the hardest, but it's the most important.
Absolutely. I think Brian had a question earlier. Do you want to jump to that?
Yep.
Brian, did you still have a question?
Yeah, thanks, guys. So I'm a post-traumatic stress survivor as well. I've been living with it for 20 years. Actually, I sat in with Ryan and Matt, I think a week ago or so, one of their Zoom calls. But I'm just curious, to all three of you, with what, if you had any kind of preconceptions about what post-traumatic stress disorder is, or what it looks like. For example, something that I've always dealt with was the way Hollywood tends to interpret it.
Yeah.
Look very, come off looking very crazy, like snap at the smallest thing or whatever. I'm just wondering if you guys took any of that into consideration when you started your projects, as well as how that might have changed as you went through it.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll start that one, because that was something that was really big with my film. I did not know anything about post-traumatic stress. And I was so ignorant that I thought it was something that only the military dealt with. I had no idea first responders and me, anybody can get post-traumatic stress. So that was one huge learning thing at the very beginning. The other one was that back then they were, everybody was saying post-traumatic stress disorder. But as we did more and more research, and I had veterans, because I was doing a lot of press and interviews and things, even in the early days when I first started, and I'd get emails from people just letting me have it because I'm not a disorder, and I don't have a disorder, and you're on TV calling it post-traumatic stress disorder. He goes, you're really pissing me off. And so after getting a few of those emails and doing more research, realized, what I've learned is that it's not a disorder. And so we talk about it in the film that I say that it's a normal reaction to a traumatic event, but it's a normal reaction. And it's a reaction that our bodies, we all, can react to depending upon the trauma. And so we do talk about that just to make it clear so that people watching the film who feel like they are broken or abnormal, we're trying to say, no, you're not. You have an injury. Right. And, some people call it PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury or post-traumatic stress. But the whole disorder thing, we're trying to get rid of because we don't want anyone to feel broken or disordered when the reality is it's normal what they're experiencing. We just want to help them now through the treatments and programs featured in the film, help them get that behind them and get their lives back.
I'd like to, my conception going in was so fueled by Hollywood because, we're movie guys. This is where, and the veterans in our family were, World War II and didn't really talk about it at all and passed away when we were young and unfortunately never had that chance to really dive deep about that. But, the way they show flashbacks, certainly think about it as one thing. And the way that Frank started talking to me about it and just really I'd be there the night he'd had one of these nightmares or, whatever it was. And it's not what it is. And yeah, my idea of what it was to what, how I see it now is completely changed. And, that's one of the reasons I feel like, I want so many of my civilian friends and civilians to see this.
Our grandfather fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. Never
Wow.
talked about it. I wish that we were able to have those conversations, now that we're adults. He passed away when we were teenagers, but
and then at the same time, on the flip side of what Michael was talking about, it's and Frank talks about it all the time, is like, again, you're trying to get fit into this box. These guys want to get benefits. They want to, you guys want to get, you want to get benefits from the Army. At the same time, there's a lot of people that are like throwing that term, post-traumatic stress around, just because they, this or that. And, we got into a lot of arguments about people about what is it or how do you define it and stuff like that. Like, it's hard to. And then that's why kind of Frank says, like, it's how you interpret your own, how broken do you feel? Like, how do you sort of identify it yourself? And I think that's, that's important, but, I'm curious about that. Like, if, Michael, you've seen that or, just about like that question of, where does it get defined to be the point of like, this is something that needs to be, treated at this level or, addressed at this level, or this is something that's just, post, just stress on a basic level.
Yeah. Well, I know I heard one definition, which is kind of made sense to me. The reason they still say there's a reason it can be called a disorder is because is it so affecting your life? Is the post-traumatic stress so affecting your life that, as I guess maybe Frank would say, is it causing a disorder? Is your whole life falling apart? That maybe it's gotten to the point where this post-traumatic stress is a disorder in your life. I don't know, to be honest, because I'm not an expert. It's just most of my talk to are just like, I'm not disordered. It's an injury and it is normal. And so that's kind of narrative we're kind of pushing, but I don't exactly know.
Having that stigma and part of trying to break that stigma and try to
exactly.
Well, it's really all about the stigma though. As somebody who's been in it for 20 years and have done a considerable amount of therapy, I've tried pretty much just about everything. And I still live with it. For me, it's kind of like, just imagine the most horrific day of your life, right? Where your entire world flips upside down. And, maybe you should have died that day or maybe not. Like mine was not combat related, right? So like it wasn't on a battlefield or whatever. But it's like imagining the most horrific day of your life and like you continue moving forward, almost like I almost could say like I died that day, right?
Mm.
Like kind of drifting through life, like figuring out what the hell is my path, that kind of thing. But yet while you're doing that every single day, it's like constantly on your mind, like a broken record. It just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. So it's almost like these days I've almost got like two parallel thoughts, right? Like what I'm doing, right? Keeping my mind busy, idle hands, whatever, keeping the mind distracted. But even while it's distracted, it's still there. You know what I mean? It's just like no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try to like, you know, either block it out or you try to work through it or whatever else the case may be, it's there. You know, so it's not a question of, you know, does it give you necessarily a disorder, you know, whatever. But it's more like, can you learn to live with it? Can you learn to manage it?
That's
Yeah.
my thing. I feel like, you know, yeah, there's no one way to sort of define it. And
Yeah.
you know, like Frank talks about that broken record all the time, and that was sort of how I started thinking about, you know, trying to put yourself in that and trying to understand what that is like.
Well, yeah, Frank also talked about the fact that it was defined differently through the years. I mean,
And that's what I was going to get to, is about how, you know, it being defined as post-trauma just gave him an understanding of it, you know. You know, depressive neurosis is what they called it for years. Like that didn't give him any tools to like try to understand what
they called it shell shock. I mean, there's lots of names that, and the World War II veterans would just, you know.
And then at the same time, we met people that were like, you know, we met the brother of one of the teachers that was killed at Sandy Hook Elementary, and he spoke to us about his post-trauma. And it's like, this is no different from Doc, who was a combat medic. Who, again, I was like, well, I never thought of a medic. You think of the guys that are out there killing. You don't think of the guys that are taking back the people and treating them.
No, those docs, man.
All these in all these ways.
Kill a lot of medics. Yeah, it's rugged.
In all these ways, it changed the way that I look at people that serve in every capacity.
But
and
I mean,
not them, but their wives, the ones that they came home to and then were affected. It's just like, to me, once I realized that it was just this like this wildfire spreading around, like it is an epidemic.
Yeah.
You know, no one talks about it. The way,
you know, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's just a matter of understanding.
Well, that's the biggest thing, though. I think you hit the nail on the head, Matt. Is that nobody talks about it, and that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, look,
People
we had a pandemic.
don't want to talk about it.
It was
and if they don't talk about it, then their loved ones don't know anything about it. Medical professionals don't know about it. You know, like one of the biggest problems in my experience with PTS is that, you know, it's the butt of a lot of jokes because people just don't get it. Like I had an acupuncturist a couple months ago through the VA, right? And she was trying to compare. So mine was non-combat related. I was drugged and raped by another man, sexual trauma kind of thing, which was tough enough as it was. Like my sergeants were trying to tell me I was committing highway robbery and shit like that, right? Like it was fucking ridiculous. But I had an acupuncturist like 2 months ago. She tried to relate my PTSD. She's like, "Oh, I had PTSD too." She's like, "I had it once. I got stuck on the side of the road with 2 hours to drive and I had a flat tire. I had such PTSD from it."
Oh my
God.
God.
I'm like, dude, you're a medical professional at the VA. I'm like, it's got to be the largest healthcare system that in the world with probably the largest population of PTS patients. And you're going to try to compare the most horrific day of a veteran's life to getting stuck on the side of the road. I'm like, oh, I got a flat tire. I had such PTSD. Like,
wow.
Break people, like, you know. But again, it's if you don't talk about it, nobody knows what the hell's going on, right?
Yeah.
You know, they wear ribbons for cancer at football games. They support, you know, kids' brain tumors. I mean, it's all these things have a cause. You know, it's like, but once you start talking about mental health, people are like, like we don't want to. You know.
Or they think, hey, we're just going to say the number 22, or we'll do 22 push-ups or something like that to raise awareness, but still nobody.
Right.
Okay, yes, there's 22 veterans committing suicide every day. It's a travesty. Like it's terrible, right?
I think it's a comfort level on our part to hear a story like yours and be like, it's okay. Like, you know, I have no idea and I cannot understand, but like it's okay, you know, and you can talk about it. And like all I can do is try to put myself in those shoes. You know, try to like think of my worst experience and amplify it by a million and wonder what if that was repeating over and over in my, you know, and it's just more people could just understand. Like to me, it's about empathy, you know.
You know, if I can piggyback on that too, one thing that I always like to share with people is 5 years ago when I was in class, there was a veteran sitting right next to me. And that's why this is happening with the power of our story. It was one veteran sharing a little bit of his story. I got curious. I heard more of his story. Then I invited my family, and then I invited everybody else. And in fact, Maryland really put on this huge forum where over 600 people came. And I'm sharing this because what you all are doing with your film, if we could do this with one conversation,
Yeah.
the fact that as a civilian, it blew my mind. How could I not know this? We're sending people out to war to protect us. How, as a civilian, do I not understand or know this? And so again, those stories and these documentaries, you know, it lands in the right lap, the right civilians, and there's something in a lot of us that want to protect our protectors.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're doing this. I love that you guys did such a great job in doing like all 3 of your documentaries.
Thanks. Sarah.
Fantastic. I love the age difference between John and Frank. And then I love the hope that Michael Gier comes in this other direction of, wait a minute, maybe PTS is really not forever, and showing these other, so it's just like this beautiful variety of different experiences with people who are willing to be so vulnerable with their stories that, again, the power of storytelling, it grabs our hearts and we want to help. So I'm excited to hear this conversation. I'm so excited about your work. Yeah, love it.
Yeah, Brian, you hit a nerve with me with post-traumatic stress. There's a huge movement to call it post-traumatic stress injury.
Yeah.
Because this is not a disorder. It's a natural response to trauma. It is very much the way response to trauma should go. I mean, seriously, when you think about if somebody exposed to extreme trauma over a short period of time, that's exactly how it's supposed to go. You know, that's not a disorder. That's a valid human response to trauma. And then the other thing, you know, if you want people to, just an observation, if you want people to have a little bit of an experience about them, have them line up with Michael being on focus, and then a little bit after do the editing and break down. That's post-trauma. You know, that's a natural emotional response to exposure to something that's horrible, you know, those kind of things. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about, because I got this listening to Frank and watching some of the trailers and that, is in World War II, when they came home on ships, it was a slow process of playing cards and coming home. They had a chance there to, in essence, decompress. Yeah. And I think coming home too quickly, we get the emotional bends, and we decompress too quickly, and we get those embolisms mentally that are really tough. I mean, and it seemed like that with Frank, watching that, it was an opportunity for him to do a long, slow decompression, and that felt very healthy for me. And I think we could really maybe that. And then back to Brian, I'm on the One VA Community Advisory Board here in San Diego, between the directors and the community. And I always bring up, compared to what? When you say it's terrible, compared to what? You know, when you got people that the most dangerous thing they do is drive to and from work, and how horrible that is. Yeah. Well, compared to other things. So, you know, when you do that, it's like there is no hospital network in the United States as complex as the VA and as large as the VA. They don't exist. You know, it is the largest. So I mean, compared to what?
But when I say that too, like, I'm just like, okay, like, the largest healthcare system in the country, you probably have the most PTSD, PTS patients, whatever, in the world. Like, it would seem like the like the first thing you do day one of orientation is some sort of like PTS sensitivity training or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, because
And
she did that. I had a psychiatrist appointment 2 weeks ago. And the guy told me, he's like, well, he's like, we've done everything, you know, we've tried every treatment, every drug, every therapy thing that's available through the VA. You're just gonna have to sit tight and wait for another thing to get through. And so I was like, so I go, so what are you saying, Doc? I'm fucked. I've been living with this for 20 years. And he snickered. He laughed at me. Like, you know, he's like, basically by laughing, he's agreeing that, yeah, I'm fucked and I might as well just go kill myself. Like, I'm not going to do that because I'm up to other things right now, you know.
Yeah, and not
stuff.
understanding.
It's insane, you know.
You would think that that's the one, and the other part is with the VA. I walk around the VA, I feel like I've got some foot friendlies around me, you know, and then so, but I don't get that at other hospitals, even close to that experience, you know. So it's like it's compared to this, compared to that, and yes, they should. And if by chance, I'll put my if you want to text me and share which hospital network you're in.
West LA.
Where?
West Los Angeles.
West LA. I'm like I say, I work with the director of the VA here, and that goes all the way up to Vision 22 and to the secretary of the VA. If it's something that they need to address in a more global fashion, you know, I'll take it all the way.
Yeah, I mean, so my only experience with the VA system has been LA. Been about the last 2 years, something like that. And for the most part, they've been good. But like, you know, like I said, in the last 2 months, I've had 2 different doctors, you know, both, you know, mental health, wellness type of doctors that had a response like that. And I'm just like, I mean, if that's my experience, one guy, just, you know, imagine.
You're not the only one.
There's no way. There's no possible way.
I've heard that too. I've heard that too from people.
I mean,
I hear it all the time. I hear it more than I hear positive. Whether or not that's fair, that's the reality.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
I think a question that really needs to be asked by is look, I mean, you know, in Michael's film, there's a bunch of different treatments, and I mean, there's SGB is something I've been very interested and fascinated by, so I'm probably more versed in that. But you know, we need to start asking, and yes, I already probably know the answer, but we need to start asking why the hell those things aren't immediately available as an option. Why? Because, and I know why, because Big Pharma owns that, and Big Pharma pulls the strings and puts the money in the pockets. And, you know, look, that the reality is that the reason why one bill already failed to make that available is because of that. And, you know, not enough questions are being asked about, okay, so what does the process really look like to have a new treatment become funded and available? Because I think there's going to be a lot of dark secrets inside of that. But those are the questions we need to ask and push on, because things do actually can happen and change can come about, but it takes so much public pressure to make it happen, you know. And film's one way. Yeah, film's one way that can help. But I mean, it's just one out of like 100 that need to happen.
It takes public outcry, or it takes people to threaten with there's 2 ways to get government agencies to change: is you threaten to humiliate them publicly, or they get humiliated publicly and have to make some adjustment, or Congress takes back the purse and pulls their money back if they don't behave. So when you're talking about federal entities, and now you got a federal entity overseeing other federal entities. So there's this kind of like, you know, like professional regards and things like that. And there are some things, I'm not a shill of the VA, but like I say, I have no problem taking truth to power. I could probably, you know, I put my phone number in there if any of you want to call me and tell me a story, and I'll carry it all the way to the secretary.
That's great.
I would like to. Let me copy that down.
It's in there. And Brian, you posted your number, right?
Yeah.
Because I've got something in the film that I know you've tried a lot of things, but if you're still willing to try something, I've got something that just I've seen such tremendous success. I'd love to just share it with you.
Yeah, for sure. Send me a text or something, or
Okay,
give me a
yeah,
call.
absolutely.
Just to speak to our experience with Frank, like I was saying about how different, West New York is from New York City. We didn't want this film to be an indictment of the VA or anything, but we saw it along the way. Like just there's nothing. Like there's just no facilities. Frank broke a tooth. Was he in? He was in Syracuse. I think he had to drive to Rochester, which was like, I think 3 hours. Only to wait like 10 hours to find out that they couldn't take him. And this is something that we were like, this at the time we're like, this is obviously going to be in the movie. I mean, this is like exactly what's going on. It's just it's like, how do you tell that story? How do you and Frank's was a tooth. It's like it's almost insignificant compared to like
But a lot of the counties,
Brian, what you're doing through. But yeah, some of these counties don't have no representation. And Frank made a point to tell every representative he met, every senator, congressman, and like you said, it's like that line between shaming or just trying to get them to be aware of the situation they maybe don't even know.
Well, I mean, like for me, for example, like I'm not trying. It's not an indictment on the VA from my end of things either. But I think it's more of a sign of the deep-seated ignorance as to what PTS is.
It's a wake-up call.
I mean, even if even the medical professionals at the VA don't have all the tools like actively necessary, ready to pull them out, how is anybody else going to have? How can we expect anybody else to have an opportunity or possibly have that in their toolkit?
That was Frank's point, was if they can't even fix my cracked tooth, like how can they fix someone's mind? How can they kind of get into and dive deep and understand what someone needs to get help?
Yeah.
One thing too, just to let you know, Doc Springer is wonderful. She wrote Warrior, How to Support Those Who Protect Us. She was on Michael Gier's documentary. She is on the next segment at 6 p.m.
Good. She's fabulous, by the way.
Yeah, she is fabulous. And she loves our warriors. And Jennifer Tracy is also somebody who helps people navigate trauma. She works a lot with first responders. They are both on at 6 p.m., in 10 minutes. And I just, stick around, maybe there's something in there too that can help, navigate some of the trauma. She can tell you more about the Stella state. What is that called, Michael?
Stella ganglion block.
Stella ganglion block. That has been
SGB. Yeah.
That's amazing for some people. Like crazy Vietnam veterans can all of a sudden are like better in one day. That one guy, I think on your documentary, Michael. But there's just some other modalities that Michael explores, and Doc Springer is a big part of that. So anyway, we are going to have to wrap this up because we're going to have the next group coming on. What a great conversation. Again, I love your hearts to do this, all of you. It's like you get these civilians with big hearts to just do this labor of love. And I do really feel like the ripple effect is something we'll probably never even know, and then we'll see it, but so much is going to be talked about and put out there. So does anybody have more thoughts before we wrap it up? Okay.
Thank you to all of them.
I would just say really quick. I heard about the SGB procedure back in March, April. I had for my fourth appeal for my VA disability rating. The psychologist that I had my CNP exam with compensation and pension. It's like a psychological evaluation. She suggested I check that out, and she said, "Oh, there's a 60 Minutes article on it, whatever." Something.
Hey Brian, I know those guys. Just so you know, like in my backyard, I live near the Naval Academy, and so a couple these two doctors that were part of that and everything, Dr. Mulvaney and Dr. Lynch, they were combat medics themselves, you know, and so they come at it from a very unique angle, right? And they treat people outside of veterans, and people come from all over the country to see them. But check it out. Their website is actually called Stellit Institute. .org or com, I'm not sure, but Stellit Institute. They're incredible guys.
Yeah, so I saw, like, so I was watching the 60 Minutes thing, and then fellow Marine, Medal of Honor recipient Dakota Meyer.
Dakota, yep. Yeah, man, he went there. He worked with those docs.
Yeah. So I saw that, and then I think one of the other people that was interviewed, somebody went to like Long Beach or something, the Long Beach VA where they're doing it. And so I brought it up to my therapist at West LA, which is literally like 20 miles from Long Beach, right? Yeah. And I'm like, hey, I heard about this. And they're just like, we have no idea what you're talking about. This is not a VA thing, blah, 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 blah.
No, they are doing it in the VA.
Long Beach, right?
Some VAs are doing it.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
There's the places that I know, like in Chicago, San Francisco, Austin, and out here where I live, those are places that I know have actual practices, but there's got to be more.
Well, Shauna's going to be on Doc Springer, and they've got the Stella group all over the country, and they're opening up all over the world. One of the guys, Dr. Tarabi, who was in my film with Dr. Lipov, who actually he's the one who started the Silicon Block. Yep. Dr. Lipov's in the film, but Dr. Tarabi, he does it very inexpensively, and he's very good at it. And he just did the recent study that was just explosive because of all the positive results that they found in this recent study. So there's a lot of options and availability, including in certain VAs hospitals throughout the country.
There is momentum. There is momentum for sure. And I'm praying like hell that like just that hope is there, that there's going to be a breakthrough where they realize, like, look, there's too much info here for us not to back this and fund it.
Exactly.
Right? So
I have a question for you guys. A couple people had mentioned to us, and we were kind of been toying with the idea since the beginning, but just about adding a sort of call to action to the end of our film. And, you know, it's not like there's so many groups and there's so many things and there's so many ways and organizations, and we don't want it to come across as being like, you know, an infomercial for Frank's organization for this or that, or one over the other. And I'm just curious what your take is on that, because we do feel like we'd like to leave people with something, you know, a way to either continue on their own, you know, doing research on their own, or, you know, just something to leave them with that's not just what we're giving them. You know, or what
I think if you feel that way, do it, because like we chose not to do that. But it's all about the purpose, right? Like if you feel that like you can help continue to build bridges with Frank, with yourself, however, do it. You know, like John actually started a nonprofit and named it after the film. And that ended up being our kind of bridge, right? We promote that for him all the time, and so he takes guys out into the wilderness and on rugged hikes, and you know, so that's like their modality, whatever, you know. But do it, man. I would say if that's
funny you say that, because we're the opposite. Walk with Frank Inc. was his nonprofit for 30 years. We found the name Walk with Frank so perfect. It's on the t-shirts, the hats. It just philosophy. We're like, we can't not call it the film that. But we did go through that idea of like, we don't want it to be like promoting his, you know, thing, or should we embrace the idea that we have this awesome nonprofit that's just Frank? It's really just one guy, you know. It's not like he's got a team of people. But it's like, you know, is that the call to action? Like, I was just curious what your guys' take as filmmakers is and working.
I mean, you do see it in a lot of films. It's not. I mean, I think, you know, for us, we, you know, I think. I don't know if it was because we felt like it would be, it feels so narrative and cinematic that we didn't want to take people out of that moment. It might have been like a big part of it, but we also knew that we would be having John talk about things right after a lot of cases. We would be doing a lot of Q&As. We knew that we would make that part of our, you know, right? Like, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, if you're going to drive engagement, it's all about engagement, right? Like if you feel like you can help somebody, then.
Sarah, I know you need us off soon, right?
Yeah, but I just, yeah, I mean, anything that helps. I never mind on our call if people promote whatever they're doing, because it is a call to action. It is directing people to something that would resonate with them.
Yeah,
And,
and you don't know what that's going to be. Like to Michael's, you don't know. Like, I mean, you know, so I try to tell people about Bastards Road Project all the time, because maybe it's 1 out of 100 people that would resonate and connect with, but I'll take 1 out of 100.
Absolutely, that is
Yeah.
definitely one. And I always just invite people to our coffee groups, because that's the thing. That's where they get connected with other veterans, other first responders, and then they all help each other with what worked for them. So it's a very simple. Then they have friends too. They make friends, and they have people to do this journey, and then somebody hears something, or we have a guest speaker on, or so I think all these things just help.
Thanks for providing us, Sarah, for this the space for the conversation. Because
and everyone here, just really love your thoughts and questions, and it's really just been amazing to be a part of this group.
I really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. And if there's anything that we can do on our platform to support you guys, or you have any other thoughts, please always circle back.
And same goes for us too with you guys, everyone there, you know, always reach out.
Thank you.